Hello,
Oh,
welcome. Some good tunes, that intro, gotta say. really gets you excited. Welcome everyone to VSFF at Home Craft and Connections. My name is Emily Weldon. I'm one of the festival co-directors at VSFF.
and I'm Nicolas Ayarbi, also Festival Co-Director. I am calling in from the unceded shared traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, upon whose lands of the Vancouver Short Film Festival operates. We're very grateful to hold our festival on these lands each year. I recognize and honor these unceded lands on which I am privileged to live, work, and create. To learn more about whose ancestral lands on which you live, work, and you may be tuning in from as well, we invite you to learn more at native-land.ca.
Thanks, Nick. And thank you, everyone tuning in for sharing your time with us today as we talk all things editing. I'm really excited to listen in on these panelists and all their expertise. Very excited. This event series is meant to stir conversations between Canadian filmmakers, and VSF at Home was born as a series of ongoing informational and community building events for our audiences to learn more about the craft and industry of filmmaking. We're really proud to host these unique opportunities, all available online and free for the public. And we have so many people to thank who help make these events possible.
For sure. We have to thank Creative VC for their ongoing support of the VSF at Home event series, for your investment in the BC Film Festivals, events like ours, and your commitment to the entire BC film industry. Minister Lana Popham from BC's Minister of Tourism, Art, Culture, and Sport couldn't be here today, though she'd like to send her greetings and send her best wishes for this event. We also want to extend a special thank you to VSFF sponsors who make our events possible year after year. Those would be Telefilm Canada, William F. White's, Global BC, 980 CKMW, Vancouver Sun, Keslow Camera, Gearbase Camera Rentals, Circus, Carolina Turek Photography, Corgi Creative, and My Tribe Media, plus a whole full list of other sponsors and community partners available at our website, vsff.com. Thank you to our panelists for being here today. I really can't wait to hear from you guys and all the insight and wisdom that you guys can provide us today. And thank you to our VSFF team of volunteers, staff who work around the clock and across the entire year to bring events like this to life. This festival and panels like this would honestly not happen without any of them, and we really love you guys.
Absolutely. And so we have more events coming up in this series. Tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m., we have Planning Your Festival Strategy, also streaming live to YouTube. So check back if you want to hear about that. And then we turn the mic over to you, our community, for the Keep It Short speed meetings for a little bit of networking. You might meet someone new. Those ones are very fun. And you can register for all of those on our website. It's vsff.com/vsff at home and learn more and get all the details. Another cool event's coming up, which is Vancouver Short Film Festival 2023. So our festival
Woohoo.
is happening, I know, right? It's happening in June. So we launch on June 2nd. We will run from June 2nd to 4th in person at the VIF Center and until June 11th online, and that will be available across Canada. Do you have a short film that you want to showcase to the community? I don't know. I think you do. Nick, do you think that they have a short film that they want to
I,
showcase?
I think they have short films. If
I
you're
think
here, you have a short
I think we've got some short films. So we want to see them. We're accepting submissions right now. You can go on our Film Freeway. It's filmfreeway.com/VSFF. And you can submit your film until Friday, February 10th. That is the cutoff if you want to submit to VSFF 2023. Something that's really cool is we have a special discount for at-home audiences. So you can use our code @HOME-VSFF. That's @HOME-VSFF. And we'll throw that in the comments in a second here. You can use that at checkout, $5 off your submission now until February 10th. We want to see your work.
Awesome, Emily. Thank you so much. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Avi Glancer, who will be the host of our panel today. So on with the show, and thank you so much, everybody.
Hello and thank you. I'm Avi Glanzer, the co-director of programming here at VSFF, and I'm excited to welcome you to the VSFF at Home Crafts and Connections panel series. We are about to begin our panel titled The Craft of Editing, and I want to welcome our panelists. Let me introduce to you Elad Tzadok, editor of Portraits from a Fire and Corrective Measures, Ashley Lynch, animatic editor on Lego Ninjago, and Hayley Sawatsky, editor of Wildflower and Laura. Thank you so much for being here, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For this panel, I have a list of questions about the craft of editing, and I will be tossing things around randomly, but please feel free to jump in at any time. I'd like to get some good discussion going. So let's begin. I guess the first thing, that is worth talking about here is, how did you get into editing? How did you start with? How did that start happen for you? So let's start with Ashley first.
I guess the easiest way to say it is that I always wanted to do all things: writing, directing, editing. Whole process I was always interested in. And honestly, when I got out of film school, it was mostly important to me that I be able to have a career working in film right away. And I didn't want to spend a bunch of years working as a barista trying to get a film off the ground or something like that, because I knew if I did that, I would get stuck there and I would never end up having a film career. And I knew no one was going to hire me to write coming out of film school. No one was going to hire me to direct coming right out of film school, but they would hire me to edit. So I put together a full-on editing machine that I could stick up my shingle and start, working my way up, editing small films and come in that way. And that's basically just been the path that's stuck with me. So that's become my career path, which I am not disappointed with at all.
Excellent. Elad, let's toss it to you.
Yeah, I went to UBC starting off as a director, and somewhere in the process connected to the art of editing. It was really being able to sit there and connect to the emotional arc of the story and be the first audience member to be able to experience it, and really get to be the person that physically is tangibly creating the movie, was something that I really connected with, and I could lose myself in it. And then from there, it kind of defaulted into editing a whole bunch of projects in a production company, and then shorts, then features, and kind of been juggling that alongside other stuff.
And Hayley, yourself?
I got into editing and film sort of by happenstance. I made a few connections with people and got on some sets, and just got more and more opportunities slowly, and kind of taught myself how to work all of different editing programs, and it just sort of happened by connection mostly, and I can't really imagine doing anything else other than this now.
Let's jump into some questions about, we're going to start with pre-production and the editor's role in that phase. So at what point in the process do you like to become involved in a project? Let's start with Elad for this one.
Is there anybody that ever says late or after anything? I think it's earlier is always better, but at the same time, it's a very fine line. You don't want to be the person kind of dictating the terms or what needs to happen in production, at least in live. I know that animation, and I'm sure Ashley will talk about that, it's completely the opposite. But earlier, in essence, tends to be better for me, and then stepping away until production is shot. At least for me.
Let's move on to Hayley. Same question.
Yeah, I would agree. There is something nice about being able to be separate from the production and then have fresh eyes when you come into post-production. There's something to be said about the value that can add. Although I will say that just recently I was working on a short web series, and I had the opportunity to be the on-set editor throughout the shoot, and it was really valuable in just giving your some weight to shots and angles and story beats and stuff. So it was definitely a useful and valuable experience.
And Ashley.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to live action, it depends on the project and it depends on the filmmaker and what they're trying to achieve. If you're doing like a documentary, then it's like there's not much you're gonna be able to really say until because that is really much a medium which you find like the story within this massive stuff that's been shot. If it's a narrative film, then it's a little bit of a different idea, and it all depends on how kind of specific with the storytelling that the filmmaker wants to get. If there's something very specific they're trying to hit, like let's go to extreme far end, like Edgar Wright's A Baby Driver, where it's like they've shot and cut to the rhythm of the music within action scenes, and for that you absolutely need an editor working hand in hand, on set. My experience with a lot of low budget stuff is they all want the editor there on set to say, hey, I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. I want if there's any shot that you feel we need that like we're gonna want later, please tell me. But oftentimes they just don't have the time or the buddy to be able to like add extra stuff to the schedule. So it kind of comes out in the wash. Sometimes it's great to be on set there for those experiences, and for other stuff I kind of enjoy just getting like a big lump of footage after the shoot is done and go, okay, what do we make of this now? Now the real work begins. Roll up the sleeves, and that can be fun.
To add to that, I find that for me, if I'm on set, or usually when I'm on set as a director, I tend to get very emotionally invested in everything that happens on set and everything that happens on the day and what people were trying to achieve, what they weren't trying to achieve, what the intent of making the film was. And I feel like that tends to happen to me regardless when I'm on set. And I don't want to carry that with me to the edit room. I want to have a separation for me. So it's okay if I cut while stuff is being shot and things get delivered to me, and that's kind of a thing. But being able to have that separation where what you're cutting is just the footage and not the entire emotional baggage of set it is incredibly important, at least for me. But I agree. It really changes from project to project, and you kind of have to adjust and roll with things as they go. And each director and each filmmaker has completely different needs.
It's a fine line because largely our job exists separate from the production itself, where it's like the people on the set are shooting the film. We're the ones that craft the story out of what it is that they shoot. And in an ideal world, all of these departments work in perfect symphony with each other, usually through the director and their creative vision for what they want for the project. But also at the same time, it's like there's a level of like, well, to get us to that endpoint, to get the story we want, you want to involve yourself a certain amount so you're making sure that your bases are covered and you're not getting into the editing room and saying, hey, it would have been great if we had this piece, but we can't go back and do reshoots. That door is closed. Mm-hmm. So we got to do it with what we've got. And when you have those moments and you can speak up and say, hey, get this, you're going to thank me later, and they do, and it works, then you just look like a wizard. And that's your goal, is to always look like a wizard.
Wear a pointy hat.
Exactly.
Just to keep on this train, is there a role you'd prefer to have in the shot listing process, or is that something that you kind of keep wholly separate from your craft? We'll start with Hayley for this one.
I do think there's value in, at the very least, sitting in on a shot listing, or at least being given the shot list or having eyes on it. If it's a really technical piece, I recently worked on a short film that had split screen. In that case, I like to really know what their plan is and kind of weigh in a little bit if I can before shooting starts, just because it's sometimes there's things that I think about that they aren't potentially like thinking about. So I like being involved in cases like that. But otherwise, I just like to be able to see it and kind of maybe even be in the background of a meeting and just kind of listening and observing, piping up when necessary.
Ashley, to you.
Yeah, there's some films where the director has wanted to involve me in the shot listing part of the film, and I'm always happy to sit in on that. And to me, the purpose of my role at that point is to basically just make sure that there isn't something glaringly obvious that's missing from the shot list that they're going to want, and that's a great part. Like I talked about how difficult it is for indie productions to add a shot onto their schedule once things are already in motion. But if you get in there in pre-pro and you get stuff onto the shot list, it bypasses that problem. Now all of a sudden the director's made that choice and it's on their schedule for the day. So if you can get in there and like get those little things that you're going to want in the edit onto the shot list, you're going to be saving a world of hurt down the line. I think that's even more valuable than being on set a lot of times.
Elad, same question to you.
Yeah, I echo that. I think, and it kind of goes back to your first questions. What stage do you want to be involved, and how do you like being involved? I think my process tends to be before production, if possible, reading through the script and making editorial notes and flagging things from an editorial standpoint. So, for instance, I understand what you're trying to achieve with this scene. Make sure you get A, B, C. I think this is what's going to help get you what you want. Or looking at a scene and flagging what's missing, what doesn't necessarily seem to follow through, and mentally keeping notes of those things so that when production gets to the shot listing phase, if they do that, because not every show does that to that level of degree and to that level of specificity, at least in the indie world, keeping track of those flags and being able to make sure that they do have what they want and what they need.
Let's move on to questions about project selection. So somebody's come to you with an idea, a project that they want you to work on. What do you put into determining whether you're going to work on that project or not? And I mean, I feel like this extends all the way from indie through to professional service work as well. So what goes into your project selection choice? Let's start with Ashley.
When it like on the upper tier for like TV series or whatnot, it's going to be like, is it something that is not going to like kill my soul working on it? There's a reason I don't work in reality TV anymore.
Anymore.
I don't have the fortitude for it. I'm much happier working in animation. But yeah, it's like, how much are they going to pay me? How fun is the show going to be to work on? But most of the time, even when it's like, big like shows like that, or when it's like smaller indie projects, it's who am I working with? That's the biggest deciding factor. Honestly, if I could be really callous, I don't even care about your script so much. I care about you. If I like you and I want to work with you, whatever your script is, I'm game for, and I want to help make that happen and make the coolest film possible. But it's entirely about those working relationships and working with cool people to make cool stuff.
Elad, same question to you.
Yeah, I actually tend to really care about story and what I'm able to connect with and what I'm able to contribute. It's not the only deciding factor, but when a script lands on my table, if it's not a good fit for me, and if it's the other components, budget, schedule, people, all those things aren't lined up with it, then it's usually going to be a no. But all those things do kind of get taken into account, whether it's the schedule and whether that's realistic or not in terms of what the filmmakers want to achieve, the budget, I mean, we live in I primarily work in the independent world, and we live in a market that is either TV industry land or small niche indie, or reality, like Ashley mentioned. And if depending where you want to live as a creative, you have to be flexible a bit with that. And then people, absolutely. It's if you're doing a short, then at least you're spending a week. At most, you're spending months to sometimes years working on a project, and features even more so. You want to make sure that the people that you're going to work with are a good fit.
Hayley, same question to you.
I would just agree with everything that they've said. It's a combination of things: schedule, story, and the people. I'll just echo what everyone else is saying, but it's I think it is really important to be able to mesh well and work well, specifically with the key creative, whether that's the director who will be kind of with you, or if that's possibly a producer, sometimes are involved in that sort of thing. But I think that relationship is really important. I find sometimes that an editor will have to double as a therapist sometimes in the edit room. So being able to kind of work with that person, it's very valuable and can be a deciding factor often.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about breakdowns and scripts. What is it like as an editor to read a script, and what does your breakdown process look like? Let's start with Hayley for this one.
When I read a script, I'm really visual with it. I feel like I can see what the action's playing out. So when I'm doing that, I try to think about how we go from here to here, here to here. I find it, I don't know, I find it very visual, but breaking it down, Elad had mentioned flagging moments that don't, that pose a potential challenge or that are really key, important, and just kind of keeping those in the back of your head. And I do that a lot too. And just trying to break down where the key emotional beats are. I think that's the big kind of understanding where the story reaches its what it's trying to say, I guess. I know this is very conceptual, but
conceptual is fine. I mean, it's the job we're in.
Yeah, just thinking about how the visuals will get to where they're trying to go. Because
Ashley, same question to you.
There's not a lot of breakdown that I do with the script, other than just like, okay, here, I know what the story is, and then with each scene, it's like, here is the turning point that the scene basically hinges on. Because any good scene, that's properly written is essentially going to have a turning point. It's going to be like the key moment of that scene, which is what that scene ultimately is all about. Even if it's a 10-minute scene and this one 30-second moment is what that moment is building to, that's your key pivotal moment. But aside from that, every film will change between what is written on the page to what is filmed on set to what is in the final edit. Editing is the third rewrite of the script. And as such, I like to, as much as possible, let the footage dictate what the scene is going to become, because by the point it gets into my hands, it's already evolved one generation from what it was in the screenplay. And it may be an entirely different beast now that it's been filmed and now that it's going into post. And the advantage that I bring in my role is to be that set of eyes that says, okay, if from scratch we're writing the scene, what is the scene now? And when you can approach it with that perspective, then I think you end up with something that's going to be a lot more honest, and it's going to serve the best version of that scene in the best way, because that's ultimately what you're getting to. The films, and I especially see this with indie films and especially first time filmmakers, is they will get stuck in, here's the script they wrote, here's what they were able to shoot. Now in post production, let's keep hammering this until it resembles the script, even though it never will. Instead of trying to find out what is the best version of the film now that we're in this third rewrite stage. And I think that's a very easy trap for people to fall into. More experienced filmmakers tend to be like very dispassionate. No, that's not working. Cut it. Let's just remove this. And that's the valuable thing that as an editor you can sort of bring to the tables to craft that version of the story.
Elad, same question to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to echo what Ashley said. I think there's definitely a journey in post where nobody sets out to make a bad film, and everybody, if you're going to go make a film, you're usually very passionate about what you're trying to do, and learning how to roll with the punches and adjust as you go and as you discover, okay, what works and what doesn't work with post is huge. So to backtrack that to like script breakdown and reading a script initially, I don't do a breakdown as well, but what I try to look for is, how is the story holding up? Is the story structure there? Are there any big kind of structural flags that I kind of can inherently see, or that I can at least note that productions might want to kind of think about, at least in terms of like when they're shooting continuity wise, or things that they might just want to keep the door open for, and kind of key moments in the script that aren't as clear or that might need clarification. And then they go shoot it, and you come back and you kind of throw it out the door and sit down and just edit what you have. But it's definitely looking for those things are the biggest kind of part.
Now, Ashley, I know you'll have quite an answer for this, but I want to know if the others have had a chance to work with this. Have you ever worked with animatics or previs? Can you talk about what this process is like and how it differs from even the post or the pre-production process in live action, but in general from how it differs from live action to other mediums? Let's open with Ashley.
So yeah, I've been working in animation as an animatic editor for about 6 years now on a variety of animated series. And it was a little bit of an eye-opening experience when I came into it, because my experience before that was all entirely live action, narrative, and documentary. And the thing that I learned is that animatic editing basically takes post-production and moves it to the pre-production process, because you have all the voices have been recorded already. The board artists draw out all the boards for the episode. You cut it together and you fill it in with sound effects and music and all the vocal tracks, and you make it come alive and add camera movements and everything like that. And you basically work with the creative director of the show to do revisions. You can get pickups for audio, record entirely new dialogue for scenes, and get the episode to the point where it's locked. And that's when you hand it off to animation, and they animate to what your locked animatic is. And that's more or less, with refinements that the episode director will do along the way, pretty close to the final episode of the show. And this all of a sudden puts the editor in an incredibly advantageous position to be able to inject a level of creativity that you don't get when everything's already shot and comes to you and it's finished and you have to make it out of what's there. Now all of a sudden you're in the room where you can be making suggestions. Hey, what if we did this shot? Hey, what if this character said this instead? And that sort of thing. And you become part of that writing process to a certain degree, which you don't get in other forms of editing. So I am really juiced by being able to do this, and to the point where if I were going to do a narrative feature, like direct a narrative feature at this point, I would do. I would voice record a table read and do an entire animatic of the entire film and cut the finished film together, so I knew exactly what shots I needed, what shots I was missing, and how the whole thing looked when it played out in motion, and basically have a finished film to just as a blueprint to shoot to. And I feel like you would save so much time on set.
Excellent. I think that's a process that I wish we had time for to do. more
I
often.
know.
I've definitely tried that before on short films. Elad, is there anything you can speak to on this topic?
Yeah, I've worked on a couple of projects that have gone through the animatic process for live action stuff. They usually tend to be VFX heavy projects, or projects that involve a lot of stunts or a lot of like big scale, and they usually have the budget to do that. And I think they're incredibly beneficial to help the director kind of understand what it is that they're trying to do on the day. But at least in my experience on the projects that I was on, once it's useful to see it and to kind of get a sense of this is what the director was hoping to kind of get. But in actuality, once you look at the footage and to the cut, it's the same way. Your aspect, it might be that a different filmmaker who has more experience with animatics, who's gone through a process very similar to kind of Ashley's experience, would be able to take that and translate that into something that would translate more directly into the post pipeline and workflow and everything. But in my experience, it works really well as kind of a broad strokes guideline, but not in terms of like taking it and then mimicking it into the final cut. There's a lot that just gets lost in translation. There's a lot that doesn't quite land in terms of the beats, the emotional characteristics and arcs, and the performances that you get on the day. But your mileage may vary depending on project and filmmaker.
Mm-hmm. Hayley, do you have anything to speak to on this topic?
I did get the opportunity to work on an animated short film, and a lot like what Ashley was saying, it becomes you become very much a part of the writing process and the story building in a different way. Instead of saying, "Oh, I wish we had this," it's basically the sky's the limit. It's what if we had this, and then you can have it, which is, it almost becomes like a exercise in tempering and pulling back and kind of only using what is necessary. But but it is cool. It's a lot like being a bit of a writer, yeah, like Ashley said.
I'd like to know if during the pre-production process you guys come into contact with any of the other keys or any of the department heads or key creatives. Like, is that a role that you is that a relationship that you ever really have contact with or build during that period of time? And does it factor in to your work in any way? Does your work factor into their work in any way? Let's start with Elad for this.
Yeah, a lot of times in the indie world, it's you end up being your own post supervisor for a chunk of things, not necessarily for every project and not for the entire duration, but enough that when the ball kind of gets rolling, you want to make sure that everyone's expectations are aligned and that everybody has a solid understanding of what the final deliverables are. So you tend to communicate with the DOP a bit about specs, about making sure that the process and the pipeline from getting the footage into ingesting it into editorial and all that kind of is streamlined and makes sense. The DIT a lot of times, and the sound people. So just mainly from a technical standpoint, and then really understanding also creatively what's happening with the DOP, getting a bit of a sense of what are the conversations that they're having with the director, and the director as well, kind of getting a sense of what's the tone, what's the world that they're building with the cinematographer. But other than that, for me, that's kind of where it ends.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, to you, same question.
Yeah, there's on indie stuff. There's usually some meet and greet stuff at the very beginning where everyone gets to hang out and chat and get to know each other, introduce everyone, that sort of thing. But in terms of like the direct kind of conversations I'll have with various crew, it's not a lot. Again, it's just like Elad said, it's like tech specs with sound and camera. But otherwise, they're more or less going to do their thing. As long as I'm getting what I need, then the person I'm really working with is the director. And depending on the size of the production, if a post-production supervisor is a luxury that you're allowed, you're working with them. Depending on how involved the producer is creatively, you'll be working with them, although they're usually more concerned with delivery. And after that, it's like the other post departments you're working with. You're working with sound design, you're working with color, and if you are the colors, that's when the DP will usually get involved. They'll come in to do the color grade with you a lot of times, or at least they like to. And that's about it. I mean, one of the weird things about editing is it is probably the most solitary of all the roles on film production. For large parts of it, I am left alone to my own devices. And that's either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at
it. Hayley, same question to you.
I'll just echo what everyone else has been saying. It's pretty short conversations with creatives, usually technical. I have had the opportunity to work with kind of in a team with a director, writer, and a cinematographer and myself, and we kind of work as a kind of a producing team in a way for a couple projects that I've worked on, specifically with those people, and it's been really cool and interesting to be able to be kind of a key creative throughout all stages, which has been really interesting. But generally, yeah, it's small conversations with key people at early times.
Mm-hmm.
That's at least for like production. When you get into the post-production world, there's a lot of you're liaising with everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we will be jumping into post-production now, and we can start talking about some of those things. What I'd like to start with is if we can talk about the difference between editorial for commercials versus music videos versus documentary, animation, features, and short films. Like all these very different formats. How do they differ for your process, or do they not differ at all? Or has there been any insights that you've come to in how to approach them in different ways? For this, let's start with Ashley.
Yeah, for different subgenres, there's definitely a different kind of attitude that you bring to them. However, I mean, I get asked this a lot. I'm sure you all as well. Whenever anyone's talking to you about potentially coming onto a project, a lot of times they'll have, and rightfully the question is like, but do you have experience cutting X genre that my film is? Because they kind of want to see that you can do it before they ask you to do it, which makes sense. But at the same time, my kind of answer to that is story is story is story. Whether you're telling a documentary, whether you're telling a horror film, whether you're telling a 30-second commercial spot, at the end of the day, you're telling story, and the structures of story, of Aristotle is the same, filtering down to all subgenres. After that, it's just like a difference of degrees and aesthetics, and just understanding that subgenre to a certain degree. There's different nuances you'll bring when you're doing the craft. Like if you're doing a 30-second commercial spot, you're going to niggle with a lot of the fine details, way more than you would in, say, a feature documentary, which is going to be a lot more kind of just sort of naturalistic in how it's going to flow. And there's always going to be like a certain level of rough edges that you're going to have. And, you know, after that, it's like, oh, I'm doing a horror film. Okay, how do we ramp up tension here? Just knowing those little tricks that you stick into your tool belt. But you can use those tools in any subgenre. And, you know, they kind of work interchangeably. It's important to know story more than it is to know like a specific, I know how to do this one thing.
Mm-hmm. Elad, to you, same question.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as an editor, your job is to pedal with emotions, and to just kind of to craft those and control those and manipulate those, and that for an audience, and that's the only important thing. You know, like story, obviously, but it is such an important thing that happens no matter what genre you're working with or what kind of discipline you're working with. The process is different. Music videos, you're engaging with it in such a different way than commercials, than documentary, because you're spending hours and weeks kind of just shuffling through the footage with the writer and the director, trying to understand what that piece is in the process of, while you're in the process of making it, versus a narrative where the script is there and it's a question of whether it works or not, and then adjusting and rearranging that a bit to kind of to make it work and to make the emotional peaks and valleys kind of flow with it. So they each have their own set of their own skill set in a weird way. And you want to, like, when you're doing a music video, you want to make sure that you understand the pace, you understand the tone, and that you're attuned to that in a very different way than a commercial that would tend to, a lot of times, like, how's your comedic timing and how does that work? Because on a 30-second spot, they tend to be a lot harder than a 2-3 minute commercial video or a 10-minute short at times, because it's really about dialing things in and doing them really, really efficiently and well, and still feeling naturalistic. So yeah, like I agree. It's the craft of understanding how to craft story is the same throughout, but the process is very different for each.
And Hayley, any insights on this?
Again, I would agree with what Ashley and Elad are saying. I think with music videos, it's different because it's less about story and more about a feeling or a vibe, or like a evoking some sort of energy, that goes in with the music and the song. So that's a little bit of a unique thing about music videos. And again, commercials are just more about efficiency. I think that was the great word that Elad used. They're really about just efficiently telling the story and using what you have as efficiently as possible.
Mm-hmm. What I'd like to know is, can you speak to your process, your whole editing process, what your approach is, where you start, how you approach the movement through the various cuts and that process as well. Let's start with Hayley for this one.
So I always start with data management. It's by, my organizational stuff. I need to make sure that I know exactly how everything is stored and where everything is. So that's always my first step. And then lots of scrubbing, sorting, and I work really closely with the script supervisor notes, which I think probably Elad and Ashley do as well. It's very valuable in just knowing what the director wanted at the time, but at the same time, I like to do my first cut pretty independently, just based on the feeling of the footage and the feeling of where the story is and where I think it should go, without too much influence other than just like me and the footage, I guess. So that's generally my first cut will be pretty independent, and then from there we get into more fine tuning and more director contribution, I suppose.
Elad, same question to you. Can you talk about your
Yeah.
process?
I like Hayley said, data management is huge and depends on whether a show's big enough to be able to offload that to somebody else. That's a big component of it. And then I tend to skip assemblies if the project is okay with that, because I tend to just try and find my way through the first pass, like the editor's pass of a show, and just find how I connect with the footage and what I see in it, based on the script, based on all the conversations that I've had with the director, to get the best sense of the tone and the vibe, and really kind of get it to a place where what would be the assembly, somewhere between an assembly and a rough cut, but has that essence of like, this is the tone that I think we talked about, or this is the world of the film, and the flow feels like what I think we were trying to capture. And then from that point, it's either you've landed in there and you kind of work with the director to refine it or change or adapt, and kind of work your way through that to the next cuts and the next iterations. And I really kind of go scene by scene and try and build it to what I think it needs to be in that first pass. And I tend to not really work with script supervisor notes. They're great if there's an issue, or if I need to reference something specific from set, or if there's footage that I'm looking for that's lost, or things along those lines. But I tend to not use them too much.
Ashley, same question to you. Can you talk a bit about your process?
Yeah, very similar. I'm just going to any editors that are watching, get data management, get that down, set up your project properly. Editors that run into problems where they're constantly crashing or having technical issues later in the pipeline, it can almost always be traced back to not setting up your project properly or managing your media properly. I never have these issues, and it's because you set it up properly from the get-go and you set yourself up for success. But from there, if I have the luxury of having an AE to do all the grunt work of like syncing and setting up the project and getting everything ready to actually do creative editing, then that's great. Usually I don't, and I'm doing that stuff myself. A lot of times I will take that opportunity when I'm doing all that syncing and setting up to get familiar with the footage. Otherwise I will watch through it. When it comes to doing stuff like trailers, because I'll do a lot of trailers for films, is I will watch through the movie several times. I'll just watch through the movie. I'll watch through the movie again and just pull out visual things and sort those. I will watch through the movie a third time and just pull out audio cues from it, before I even start thinking about like, okay, how am I going to build this trailer campaign? So it's a little bit different depending on what the project is. And as you're pulling selects, it's going to very much depend on what type of project you're doing. A music video is very different from doing something narrative when it comes to just the process of how you get everything in there. Similarly, I will look at the script supervisor's notes and make notes of which are basically the director's printed takes, and favor those. But I also like to go off book on the idea that the director's there on set watching a monitor and watching the actors live in person, and that's not always the same as what actually gets captured through the lens. And with fresh eyes, again, the big valuable thing I am bringing to the project is I have not been part of that whole production pipeline, and I'm coming to this with a certain level of freshness that I am able to objectively look at all the takes and say, well, you circled take 6 and 7, but really 5 is our winner here. And if that's the case, then I will make that call and move it in. The director may say down the line, it's like, I really want to use take 6 for this. It's like, okay, let's try take 6. But in my first pass, much like Hayley, I like to be left alone and create I just try to create what I feel is the best version of the story the director is trying to tell. And I also try to surprise them in a way in which I can show them something that they themselves did not know was going to be the best creative way to tell this story. And like, oh crap, you made my thing come alive, and I wouldn't even have thought to do it that way. When you can have those moments, that's great. That's what you should be doing on a film. And those are the moments I always strive for.
You spoke to the ability to work with an assistant editor. I'd like to talk about that for a bit, both in terms of if you've had any experience working as one, but also what's your experience of working with one, and how does that integrate into your process? How does that make your life easier? What parts do you offload onto them? Let's start with Hayley for this one.
I haven't had many opportunities to work with an assistant editor, unfortunately. Although in the commercial world that I work in, I do have an assistant, and they take care basically of cutting out all of the unusable bits, making, and then all I have to worry about is just putting together the interview. Usually it's an interview because it's a commercial world, but that's offloading kind of the grunt work is the best part of having an assistant editor. And then just offloading that grunt work is really useful for me.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, can you speak to assistant editors?
I've spent more time working as an assistant editor than I have working with assistant editors. Unfortunately, most of the time I have to do my own assisting, which honestly I don't mind because it affords other opportunities. Like I said, that's a chance to get familiar with the footage that you would have to spend anyways, but instead you can do that in the AE process. And then also, the project is set up exactly the way you want it. The danger is it's like when you do have an assistant is sometimes you can get in a mindset, well, it's just faster and I know it's done the way I want to do it if I just do it. So I don't know, take a coffee break, which is not how you want to be, having an assistant editor at your disposal. But basically medium management is the largest part of assistant editor's job. They're going to be handling all that stuff. So the only thing you are worried about is you have scenes ready to cut with and you are creating the story. And that's sort of the ideal situation. But also understanding that assistant editors are all hungry, frustrated editors themselves, and that they want to be in on the creative process, and they will feel wonderful if you can say, hey, take a pass at this scene or something like that. And if they do a great job, then you get to take credit for it. So, that's always a bonus. But for working as an assistant editor, it's definitely about knowing the media, knowing the software, knowing how to. It's troubleshooting is a large part of what being an assistant editor is. And you can always tell the editors that don't have AE experience, because the second the software isn't doing what they expect it to do, they're like, panic, I don't know what's happening, how do I solve this? Whereas like if you've got a few years of assistant editing under your belt, when Avid starts like doing weird stuff, you're like, oh, I know how to break Avid, here we go. And you can just like hop in there and like solve your own problems, which is a great skill to have.
Get out the candles and the pentagram. Elad, can you speak to assistant editors as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's usually what ends up happening with me with Avid as I sit down and I'm like, I pull out the pentagram, I pull out this, I pray to the Avid gods.
Which is George Lucas, by the way.
But yeah, I haven't worked too much as an assistant. I made a decision earlier on a decision and also options available at the time to focus on editing, which becomes this kind of mixed bag because on the one hand, the skills that you're developing are different than those that you develop as an assistant editor. So I feel like on a certain from a certain standpoint, you end up working on story and developing those story muscles in a very different way to the technical muscles that you develop as an assistant in when you're kind of starting off your career. And each one of those journeys kind of takes you its own way, and eventually kind of leads back, hopefully, if you do things right. And yeah, working with assistants, it's really about, it depends on the project, right? It's really about freeing your time up and whether the production has the ability to free your time up to work on the story, and take everything else that isn't physically making the movie and offloading that to the side, because there's so much media management. If there's VFX, there's so much of those, and working with VFX editors to orchestrate all the footage coming in and going out. And I'm sure, Ashley, you could speak to this in VFX as well, all the various versions of everything coming in and the whole machine around just, this is the movie we're watching and this is the movie we're trying to make. So that you can focus on the creative and you can free yourself out to work with the directors, the producers, and everything on getting the story to be the best version of itself, and getting the movie to be the best version of itself. And then, yeah, the more clear cut you are in terms of the structure and the parameters of the media management and the storage and the projects, the easier it is to kind of set those up for everybody else and to make sure that they're following suit, and make sure that it tracks all the way through the end of the project, not only for offline editing, but also deliverables. And then later when it gets handed off to color and sound and everybody else, because you're really trying to make everybody else's job clean and easy and understandable on that front.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with kind of what Ashley was saying earlier. Sometimes when I'm working with or have the opportunity to work with an assistant editor, I feel like I'm losing an essential part of the process, which is kind of familiarizing yourself with the footage. So it can sometimes be in indie projects specifically. I think it's sometimes beneficial just to be able to do that myself. And I also can be I have a hard time relinquishing control of the way I want everything and the way if somebody sends me something with like a crazy timeline, I'm just, I'm going to spend hours fixing it. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask, how much do you like for the director to be involved in your cutting process? I mean, some of you have spoken to liking to do a pass on your own before somebody comes in, but I recognize that the answer for a lot of people will be, whatever the director asks for. But what's the perfect scenario for you as to when their involvement becomes the most beneficial for your process? Let's start with Elad for this one.
Yeah, for me, once I have that first editor's pass and I kind of get it to, this is as good, not as good, but this is kind of the direction that I think the movie ought to be going in, and my understanding of what we've kind of discussed and what we're hoping to achieve. From that point on, it's really about creating that dialogue with the director, because it's having, the more they're involved at that stage, the better the film will be, in my experience, because it's ultimately you're making their film. If all that you get is a meeting where they're like, more shorter, or which is a note that you get sometimes. Like, this is great, more of this, but less time. It's great, but also doesn't really help craft the film to the vision that they want. So there is expectation of downloading their intent and downloading the things that they're hoping to achieve with it, and to the best of your ability, you hope to do that. But it's really about collaborating with those people and being able to find that balance and create something together that is ideally better than each of us doing something alone. Because you come in with your own kind of set of expectations, and also as the outside observer, and they're coming in carrying the story that sometimes they carry with them for years. And like Ashley mentioned before, sometimes they can't let go of certain things, so it takes time to adjust that. But it's part of the process.
Ashley, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, as much as possible, I like to work with however the director wants to work, because again, ultimately it is that I want them to feel the best about the process. However, I am at the point where I do always request, like, upfront, it's like, leave me alone to finish the cut, and then I will present that to you. And then the trade-off is, after that, we will spend as much time as we want getting this film exactly where you want it to be.
Yeah.
But early in my career, I had a few experiences with, directors that wanted to sit through the entire process of the editing, and sometimes it would devolve into just them saying over my shoulder, going, okay, now cut there, now cut there, now cut there. And it's like, well, I'm just operating the keyboard at this point. I'm not editing this film. But more than that, I don't have the opportunity of the room to play and discover and do my craft with this. And it's not a joyous experience for anyone. And I'm not sure you get a better film out of that either. So I like to, as much as possible, work in that way. The last few years with COVID has made everything, it made everyone kind of readjust how we're doing stuff, because for the most part, even at this point, I still don't have a lot of directors that come into the studio. People very quickly got comfortable with handling everything online. There's a lot of great review tools that are available. Frame.io is excellent, where you can throw up the cut and people can watch it, and they can leave notes which turn into markers in your timeline where they leave the notes. They can even draw on the screen and draw little circles like, hey, can we remove this thing in the corner here? That sort of thing. And you can end up with those conversations and do stuff over Zoom and whatnot. And it's not the same, but we've adjusted and it works. And, again, it depends on the project. It depends on the relationship you're having with the filmmaker. So it's, new world, new challenges.
And Hayley, same question to you. Do you have any insight on this?
I would completely agree. I love Frame.io. I think it's so great. It makes it so much easier to communicate instead of having to, pull up a Zoom meeting and try to share your screen, and that's a nightmare. But I completely agree. I like to have a first pass independently, and then work with the director. Again, it is having those really intense working sessions can be a little bit daunting, I suppose, just because sometimes the director will say, I want it to do this, and then you make an adjustment, and then you have to make other adjustments, and it's time consuming, so they don't understand sometimes the process, I guess, that it's not going to be just ready. But I do like having creative working sessions that are kind of more high level story and structure, as opposed to micro cuts and and little things like that. But but yeah, I like working and collaborating with the director. I think that that's an essential part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
There's just one thing I want to add real quick to that. There's this great quote that I heard a while back that has really kind of stuck with me and been sort of like a driving guiding star for working with directors of all types, which is don't tell me where to cut, tell me what you want to feel, because ultimately that's what you're driving for, is what is the emotion of this scene, and if you tell me what that emotion is, then I can work towards that. But if you're just telling me, no, I want to cut here, I want to cut here, it's like, why? And I understand why a lot of directors say that, because sometimes it can be hard to articulate these sort of things. It's hard to articulate what a feeling is. It's hard to articulate to a colorist. It's like, this is how I want the scene to feel. Whereas it's easier to just say, could you make it more blue? And I imagine, there's this issue working with a lot of music composers as well. And ultimately, it's all getting at the same thing. What is our end goal for what you want the audience to feel? Now let's work towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really good kind of strategy for getting everyone on the same page for the types of notes that are constructive to making the best narrative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that you mentioned that. I think I was trying to find a way to articulate that, and I think you kind of nailed it on the head, because it's about allowing you to problem solve as a creative. It's about allowing you to work your craft and to come up with solutions that sometimes might be out of left field, but help hit that emotional goal that you're trying to create, right? Or present something different. Whereas if you're just like a keyboard monkey, it makes it a lot harder. And nobody wants to do that.
I'm a big fan of Frame.io as well. It's a huge boon. Accomplishes, you're right, the whole era where we had to share screens when doing it remotely. Nightmare. Just absolute nightmare.
Although I will say one of the tricky things that is difficult about doing everything over Frame.io is having a conversation about anything. Like, sometimes I'll send off a cut and then I'll get a note back from the director saying, hey, can we try doing this? And it's like, and I want to say, well, I tried that the first time and it didn't work because you don't really have that footage. So I did it this way because this is the only thing that's like really working. This is a solve rather than a creative, wish list here at this point, which happens a lot in editing. And when it's just like notes passed back and forth as markers in Frame.io, it's really hard to have that back and forth conversation about why you did something a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if the pandemic has taught us one thing, it's that there's no silver bullets for collaboration tools.
No.
And I definitely know that some of my favorite experiences of working with an editor is getting to that point where you're sitting in the room with them. You both recognize that you want to make a fix, and you're both kind of problem solving solutions together as to come to that. Can we try this? Can we adjust it this way? Okay, that didn't work. Let's scrub back. And I think that part of the process is something that I feel like has been missing from the pandemic approach. But
absolutely,
I definitely would love to find a way to replicate remotely, because we're not always working with people in the same cities anymore. But definitely is the part of the process that I miss.
I mean, there are much more expensive tools. There is Evercast, which you can basically use to live stream from your editing software, so that they can be involved in. You can edit in real time over a stream with your collaborators, but at this point, Evercast is still kind of an enterprise tool. We use
maybe there are silver bullets. They're just not affordable to us.
Exactly.
I find that even Zoom works well. It all depends on how you do it. Like for me, I tend to share my editing window in Zoom, so not just the client monitor with the picture, but the actual window I'm working on, because I think it really helps the people I'm working with to kind of reference and see what I'm doing and why something's taking a little bit of time, why they're waiting, but also be able to have a conversation about the same thing. So you do get to work and have that collaboration. Like, well, maybe move this clip earlier. No, not there, but maybe move it there.
Mhm.
Swap this out. Take a look at this. So you get a little bit of that back and forth. And if your internet connection's good and their internet connection's good, it actually works quite well.
It is doable, but yeah, it's like a lot of times internet connection does become a problem,
bottleneck.
and also sync with audio.
Mhm.
Streaming over Zoom is far from perfect at this point too.
No, that's a great point. A combination of tools, but we'll get there one day, maybe.
Yeah.
There really is no substitution to just having someone in the room and having a conversation. Like there's something really valuable about that, I think.
I think we're getting back to the point where we can brave that a little more comfortably. But
Absolutely.
I think that there's also a difference when you're in like a commercial environment versus a independent environment, where I think I'm more inclined to want to hang out with an editor and them want to hang out with me on a project we're doing together, rather than on a commercial project where there's kind of a level of coldness or that approach. Like, for that, maybe have less of a hands-on situation, and for the friend, have more of a hands-on situation.
I mean, the commercial environment is more a matter of schedule because everyone has like such tight ties. It's like, okay, we need to hammer this out because I have a thing at 1 that I gotta get to. So, there's a lot of that.
Let's speak a little bit about different types of cuts. We've talked assembly cut, we go rough cut, fine cut, polish cut, director's cut, producer's cut, all sorts of different cuts. Can you speak to like how these differ in your mind, and like when you're moving from one step to the next, kind of like what gets worked on as you go from one to the next? Let's start with Elad for this.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of, you start with the assembly, or with the editor's cut, which is always kind of your first pass. And then hopefully you work with the director on the next one. And from that point on, it kind of changes based on the scale of your production and what it is that you're doing. I mean, I'm sure Hayley can speak to commercial work and talk about, you can have 40 different cuts with 50 different client notes, and you're sending versions day in, day out. You can hopefully refine and keep on working on the rough cuts 1 or 2 more times until you really kind of get to a place where the film is at a producer's cut, or at a, like, I'm trying to understand the question a little bit more. Like, you have the various stages, and we can talk about what those are, but every project is really different based on that, unless you're kind of in a more standardized environment. And then it's about the machine, and it's about, okay, editor gets a week to do this, director gets a week to do that, producer gets their notes at the end, and broadcaster gets to like sprinkle in their flavor, and then everything gets shipped out. But on independent projects, it kind of just goes on, and you try and hit the deadlines, and the movie eventually gets abandoned. I think every movie eventually gets abandoned.
I mean, we'll get to what a finished film is in a moment, but Ashley, can you speak to this?
Yeah, very similar. It's in TV, it's very structured. It's like, here's the rough cut, here's the fine cut, here's our locked cut. Moving on, next episode, sort of thing. It's like, it is very much part of that machine, and that structure is very important and necessary in that sort of environment. In the indie world, I always like to skip over assembly and even rough cut if I can, and go like, I always try to deliver as much of a polished finished product as possible as my first cut that the director will see, because I always think that gives the best chances for, like, here's the ideas I've put into it. If I make it look the best, that's going to help sell it as like this should be in the final version of the film. And then also hopefully like the least amount of work on the back end that needs to be done in tweaking the film from there. And I try to view it after that, once the director comes in and we start making all these adjustments with the film. I just view it as tweaks at that point. I may give the cuts different labels. Like, I might get to a certain point where I call this a fine cut. And sometimes that just subliminally is like, okay, we're coming near the finish end. So like, if you have more notes, this is where you bring them in before we lock it. But even at this point in the state that editing is in these days. Lock cut is a euphemism. Nothing is ever locked. Even once you fully online stuff, it is very easy to unlock something and make more changes after the fact. We're no longer in this completely kind of like shut down state where it's like, well, once it's gone to the mix, that's it. No more changes, you're done. It's like we're in a very malleable position right now. Everything's fluid. But once it's, if possible, once you lock, it's very nice to be able to say, okay, done, finished, bringing the hammer down on that one. So it's, but yeah, after I start working with the director, I just like to think it's like, let's just tweak until we're done tweaking.
Lock cut final, lock cut final, lock cut final. Hayley, can you speak to this as well?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that fluid is a really good way, Ashley, that you described the way that indies can be, especially with opening and closing cuts. And, there's always that terrifying moment when you've been working on it and then suddenly it's, what if we tried this, crazy, what if we did it all in reverse order? Somebody always comes with a question like that, or a thought like that. And so indies are never really finished, I think, or can always change, which is scary. But with commercials, yeah, it's pretty structured. Like Ashley said, it's the first cut you're going to get.
Nope.
Oh, did we lose Hayley?
We might have.
Oh no.
Oh dear.
Just wait a moment to see if they unfreeze.
Oh,
Coming back.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. This is what we're talking about internet speeds.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's all I really had to say is that it's more structured in commercials and becomes more much more easy, and notes are a little bit more technical than creative, really.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I'd like to ask is, when cutting, obviously, we're not talking here about like the margins on a shot, but like, how do you decide when you leave something on the cutting room floor? And I'm like whole sections, scenes, more than just shots here. Like what guides that decision-making process for you? Let's start with Hayley.
If something is just not working and it's becoming more of a challenge to try to fit it in, and it's just it sticks out like a sore thumb, that's kind of when you need to start having a conversation. Like, do we really need this? But it changes with all projects and with all directors. It's really, it depends on the how effectively the story is being told, and if it's if you're going for more efficiency and cutting on time, then there's things you need to think about if they're just taking up space and they don't serve a purpose, then those are things that maybe need to go. But it can be hard to have that conversation sometimes with the director and with especially if they're also the writer. They have a very strong attachment to every piece of the story. I'd say, yeah.
Ashley, can you speak to this?
Yeah, very similar. If something's not working, then it should go. I'm also a big fan of making everything shorter. Most films are improved the more you take out of it, which is very unintuitive for a lot of people. There's a right length for every piece, and the piece will sort of dictate that. But there's a lot of films that end up having some fat on them, and that fat can always be trimmed and excised. And sometimes it's in the writing process too. Sometimes there's a scene that's just like, well, I know this made sense when you wrote it, but it's a dead scene where there's no conflict and nothing is being dramatized. So why is this here? This is not accomplishing anything. It's just filler. And if we remove this, then the film gets X amount better. Sometimes you can end up doing like a whole restructuring thing where you can take like two scenes and sort of like merge them together and create a whole new scene out of that actually is like a lot more fluid and gets across exactly what the filmmaker was attempting to in a much more kind of efficient way. And when you can come up with those solves, it's actually quite wonderful, and it's one of the great magic tricks of the editing process, which is quite wonderful. But yeah, again, exactly what Hayley said, and I kind of spoke to this earlier. It's like, especially if the director wrote the material too, it's a process in getting to the point where they're comfortable with letting it go, because ultimately they want to save all the children, and in the edit process, not every child is worth saving, because you want the best film possible, and sometimes those things that you want to cling to because you loved it in the moment, or you loved it when you shot it, or you loved it on the page, hurts the big picture and makes the whole lesser. And it's about identifying those moments and convincing the director that, hey, let's look at without this. Let's show it to someone without this and see how they respond to it.
Elad, same question to you.
Yeah, I don't really know if I have anything to add to that. I think both Ashley and Hayley kind of hit the nail on the head. Often you tend to identify one of those scenes or one of those moments or something like that earlier on, perhaps in the process, but it really is just a matter of knowing how to manage that and negotiating that and working with the director to a place where the creative team and everybody, not just the director, because sometimes it's the producer that has that voice, sometimes it's somebody as the writer, are able to see whether the scene is serving a purpose or a moment or a beat or something, or they're serving a purpose or not. And if it's not, it should go.
Yeah. I think in an ideal world, every shot serves a purpose towards the story. Every scene has meaning, but that's not always the case. But sometimes it's just a shot is pretty, and so they, want it. But if it's not serving its purpose, then why is it there?
I definitely have a situation on a short I worked on a few years ago where this is one of those ones on a deadline. So the editor was in my apartment editing overnight, and I wake up the next morning and the editor looks at me and he goes, "We cut the whole ending out." And I go, "Sorry, what?" And this is like a good 6 to 8 minutes of content just cut from the film. And he's like, just take a look at it. He shows it to me, and it's much better. Like the whole thing flows a lot better. It's like, unfortunately, that's like 8 hours of filming on day one, but like that you have to quickly get that out of your head. You're not gonna add to the film just because you shot it. And call the editor or call the director over, brought them in, they watched it, they're like instantly, yep, that's better. Instantly got on the phone with the actor who was unfortunately cut from the film as a result of their scene being cut, and had the hard conversation about that. But it's so interesting where we never saw that. We never saw that in the entire process leading up to production and through production, that scene didn't need to be there right up until we had it with the edit, and the whole thing could go. And the film flows a lot better for it. The emotional beat at the end is a lot stronger, and I wish we could make those calls earlier on in production for everybody's sake.
Although at the same time, one thing that I always tell filmmakers before they go out and shoot, when they ask these questions, they'll say, "Hey, do we need this?" And my answer is almost always, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So it's a lot easier to cut out a scene than it is to go, damn, if only we had this, we could have made this work. It's like, sure, it sucks to lose this thing that you spent all this time on, but that's part of the process. And we've all had that experience watching a film where it's like, you get to the end and you go, okay, the film has already ended, but it's still going. Why haven't they figured out that they should have stopped by now? I've already checked out. I'm done with this story, but it insists upon itself still. So it's like, sometimes it's about knowing exactly when to get out.
I'll add that we as editors are not immune to making these same mistakes. There's things that we get attached to that we don't necessarily see, that are redundant or that don't need to be there, or that we think is doing one thing but isn't really landing the way we expect it to. So it's part of why this is a collaborative process, and it's part of why, as much as sometimes we want to kind of disappear into our own little bubble and make the film and be like, we made this, but it isn't.
I've definitely had that experience as well as a director, kind of clashing with an editor over the call on how to approach the edit based on what we shot versus what they see, and being able to kind of build that accord where you come to the understanding of why it was shot this way or why they feel the edit needs to be stronger that way is always an interesting process.
It is, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've had experiences where I think that I've come up with something really great and I'm really excited, and I'm like, excited to give it to the director, and it's a little bit disheartening. I mean, criticism is is going to happen. If you ask somebody for their opinion, they're going to give you an opinion. But I think that's one of the hardest things sometimes that I find, is feeling like you put a lot of creative energy into the cut and then being like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, which is like, it's just a little bit of an ego boost, or ego opposite of a boost, ego shot.
Destruction. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every once in a while, you do have those things where it's like, here's this thing I put into the edit that I'm really proud of, and I think this works really well. And it's not necessarily what the filmmaker intended. And sometimes you'll get into the situation where they're on the fence about it, or they might decide, well, I think maybe we should cut this. And you're like, no, I want to defend this. I want to stick up for this one because I do think this makes the film a better film. And you don't always have those agreements with the filmmaker.
Nothing's better, by the way, to solve that problem than I'll give you options and give worse options.
Yes.
Really showcase how your idea is the right one.
Or even the most passive aggressive trick where you go, okay, I fixed the problem, and you just show them the exact same cut and they go, it's much better now.
I love that.
I've never actually done that, but I've heard other people do that. And I'm like, oh, if that backfires, that would go so badly.
I've seen it happen, and it's usually in the commercial world rather than the independent world.
Yeah.
One thing that I received a piece of advice early on in my career that I don't love, but I respect, which is as often as possible, get dirty OTS reaction shots, like as spares. Just do it. If you got a scene with dialogue, get dirty OTS reaction shots from everybody onto everybody, because you'll get to the edit and you'll want to cut out a whole chunk of dialogue, and like 8 shots can be reduced to 1 shot. And frankly, I think it's one of the best pieces of advice I ever received, and I try to instill that onto new directors as often as possible. Just do it. Don't care. Just get your safeties. Like, this is not one of your baby shots. Make it nice, but like, just get it.
Whenever I hear a director say, and we want to do this scene in a oneer, I'm just like, oh. It's like, sure, that's like really easy for me. I just have to drop the scene in. But if anything in that scene doesn't work, if it drags at any moment, you don't have an option. You're stuck.
Well, Eisenstein's theory of the montage is that the cut is the most important part, not the shot. So
absolutely,
if your shot is all you've got and you don't have a cut, then that shot better be really, really good.
Yeah.
You better do a lot of work with that oneer. Not everything can be a touch of evil. Touch of Evil, is that the one with the big, long one?
Yeah.
Not
big
everybody can be that
big
movie.
Tracking shot in the opening.
Yeah, it's always funny too when you're watching a scene and you realize halfway through it was a oneer, and you're like, it could have not been. Like, I didn't notice until this amount of time. I guess this leads on to a really interesting question I have, and I'm gonna throw out air quotes when I say this, but like, there's a saying in poetry which is like, a poem is never finished, it's walked away from. So when is a film finished? Let's start with Elad for this one.
When you earn the money. It's the reality. When it's abandoned, it really, you kind of hit a point where I don't think I've ever hit a project that everybody's just like, okay, it's done. This is the pinnacle, the epitome of what we were trying to achieve. You get close, but you're never. There's always tweak a little bit of this, tweak a little bit of that, and it's always like, okay, we got to walk away. We got to call it. And yeah, that's
Ashley, same question to you.
Yeah, I love deadlines. The worst thing you can ever tell me when I ask when does this need to be done by, it's just like, oh, no real deadline, just like, well, whenever you can fit it in. It's like, well, if that's the case, it's going to constantly sit on my back burner in favor of those things that do have deadlines. One of the things I love about TV is like, because it is a machine and everything just like constantly moving forward, you know exactly what your deadline is. Here's when the episode is finished. And after that, it moves on and you move on to the next episode. It's very structured in that way. And I kind of love that. For indie stuff, that's one of the other things that I love about stuff like Crazy Eights or 48-hour film festivals is it's like, okay, we have a weekend to make this movie. There's a definitive deadline when this thing needs to be delivered. And then after that, I don't have to work on this thing anymore. And that is a wonderful thing.
Please don't open it up again. Please don't open it up again.
That happens a lot too.
Oh yeah.
For 48 Film Festival, they come back. Now let's go back and polish it. And like, okay, why? We made it in 48 hours for a reason, but I get it. And there's a lot of indie films that they will become forever projects. They will go on forever. And when is it done? And it's like not even so much when it's abandoned, but it's like, especially in the indie world, when it's like when people just don't want to work on it anymore, because a lot of time you're not paying people enough. You're definitely not paying people their rate. Sometimes you're not paying people at all. So at that point, it's favor time. And at a certain point, people's patience for working on something that is taking up their time that they're not getting paid for is like gonna run out. And you want to finish your film before you reach that point, before you try everyone's patience. So it can be a difficult, tenuous thing. And ultimately you want to see that thing out there in the world. There's too many things that, I've worked on that just like, they never seem to leave or go anywhere. And it's like a disappointment. It's like, why did I work on that? No one's ever seen it.
Hayley, can you speak to this?
Yeah, I agree. You could work on something, forever and keep improving or changing it. I find that sometimes when I need to start saying, okay, we need to be done, is kind of if you start working in circles and kind of like finding that you're having the same conversations, you're saying the same things, and you're kind of tweaking the same things and tweaking them back. Like that happens occasionally with me and or with certain projects I've been on. And at that time, it's like, we just have to make a decision. We just have to decide and say it's good and, goodbye.
We're not making anything better or worse. We're just making it different.
Yeah. I call that rearranging deck furniture.
Well, it's especially like when we're talking about donating time effectively, when we're talking about indies that are favorite projects, if you're donating time and that time is being wasted, then like that's not worth anybody's time. And it's already so hard to earn favors from an editor, as you've discussed. It's a solitary job. It's not like we can do that much reciprocation. So when you're really burning through that goodwill, like that's when you need to take a step back.
And one of the other things I've found in the indie world, and like this is just how it is. But people will come in with a project. They're like, okay, we want to move fast. We want to hit this date. We'll rush, we'll hit that, we'll lock the cut, and then it'll be an indie project that has like a certain level of VFX, and then it'll go to sound design. And VFX people and sound mixers are really hard to kind of lock down for indie underpaid projects, especially VFX, because there's just like so much demand for VFX, and like they don't have time for non-paying indie work. And sometimes you get a few days of favor work out of people, but there's been so many indie projects I've worked on where we rush to get the thing locked, and because there's like 4 VFX shots in it, it goes on for a year just getting like VFX, and it's still sitting there. This project is still active. Eventually these effect shots are going to come back to me and they're going to go into the film, and it's just one of kind of the pratfalls of doing a indie film with VFX at this point.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the I mean, we've touched on this a little bit, but what is the difference in, I guess, feeling behind working for hire, like in a studio environment, versus working on passion projects? Is there much of a difference? Do you feel a different energy? I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to hear just on this point specifically. Ashley, let's start with you.
There is a difference in the sense that the TV world is more, it's more schedule driven, schedule and budget driven, and everyone knows exactly what those parameters are, and you work to hit those budgets. But at the same time, I've been lucky enough to work on the same show for like 5 years now, and we have like this core creative team that works on this show, and it's absolutely incredible. We have this shorthand for everything that we do on the show, and it's this great working collaborative experience that the type that you dream of when you get into doing this type of work. And it's only on a show like that you can get that kind of long-term creative relationship with a small group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And in the indie world, it's very similar, where you'll tend to hopefully work with a lot of the same people. You'll cut something for someone and develop a working relationship with them, and hopefully they'll make a bunch of stuff and you'll work on their stuff, and it ends up the more times you work with someone, the more times you have, the tighter that relationship gets, and the more you get on the same page and in sync as creative partners on a film. So that's great. But there is working on indie films, there's also just a lot more randomness, because you'll be working with a lot more different types of people, and people of different experience and skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you'll be working with people who it's like this is one of the first things they've worked on, or they've only worked on like a handful of student projects at this point, and you're coming into it with like, well, I've got a decade of experience in television, so that's what where there's a little bit of like a difference in where everyone's coming from, and that can be a great thing too, because you end up with like a lot of diversity. And hopefully, when you're a more experienced person in that situation, you're also aware it's like, well, I also get to bring to the table a little bit of like mentorship, in the sense of like, hey, I've been through a lot of films at this point. It's like, I know we need to do this, this, and this, and this, and people feel comfortable knowing that bases have been covered.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, I think that in indie, a lot of times the driving force behind a project is the passion, or the story, or the people who want to tell the story. And like, so I say that like the driving force would be passion, but in commercial world, kind of like or I guess the motivation maybe is often the paycheck. I hate to say it, but like that's kind of the truth of it, right? Like the reason that indies are the way they are is just because they're really passion based. So I think in terms of energy between each, it kind of comes from what the motivating factor is. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Elad, can you speak to this?
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
The idea and the energy of working for hire versus working on passion projects, like hire in a studio environment versus passion projects and like what's that energy difference like for you?
I mean, ideally they're both one and the same, but it doesn't always happen. It's a balance, and I think for me, at least as an editor, I feel like I have to find my way into caring about a project, and you have to find a way to connect to the material. If you're just working on something and completely emotionally disengaged, I don't know if you can do your job. or at least I can't. So part of the work that I've put into it is really trying to find a way to connect to it.
I'd like to speak to working with other post departments. We've talked about sound design and color and composers and whatnot. But like, what does the process look like for you? What is it like to work with those other departments? How do you interface with them? What's your comfort level with them? Let's start with Hayley for this one.
Usually it's pretty much email based. Can you send me this, and here's the specs that I need. I wish sometimes that I had more interaction and understanding with the different post processes. I have had the opportunity to work with in color a little bit, so it's really beneficial to understand why they're asking for what they need, to really understand technically why they need that. But because sound is interesting because they need a locked cut, and so there's not much collaboration there that happens. There's a lot of temporary kind of sound effects and music and stuff that is important to put in the edit, but in terms of collaboration, I have usually pretty minimal collaboration with sound designers. Colorists, it's a little bit more. I might reach out to them and just say like, hey, do you think you can make this shot work with this shot? Or do we need a new solution? Like, that's sometimes how I would interact with a colorist. But yeah.
Ashley, same question to you.
Yeah, very similar. I've been in the fortunate position of being able to do a lot of different roles. I've worked as an online editor. I did that in docudrama for a little while. Also worked as a colorist, and I've also been able to sound mix a few projects as well. So I like to try to be able to cover as much of post-production as possible. And as a result, I've been able to do what I call cradle to grave post on some smaller projects where it's like, okay, I'm doing the edit and I'm doing the sound mix and I'm doing the color grade and I'm doing the online mastering. So it's like, as soon as it lands in my hands, I am the last stop for that film, which is, kind of wonderful to be able to do all those positions. And one of the advantage of that is when you work on something where it's like, oh, I need to send this to audio post, or I need to send this to color. Speaking to what Hayley said before, it's like, I know why they need what they're asking for. And so it's a lot easier to know, okay, I need to do this, this, and this, and this, because this is the reason why they need it. And once you have that sort of understanding of the pipeline, then you can address any sort of problems that tend to arise from that, as there inevitably are little problems. And when they come back and say, hey, we need this, and you're like, but I gave you that, what's the problem? It helps if you can understand that pipeline. But aside from the handoff of those materials, when other people are doing mix, when other people are doing color, when other people are doing online, there's not a lot of collaboration that happens. That's the director. They'll go into the mix. They'll go into the color grade. The DP will often go into the color grade. But after that, it's out of your hands. You're just kind of done with it unless they come back and say, hey, we're missing this thing. Can you send this over? So it's really it's mostly just delivery materials.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Elad, can you speak to this as well?
Yeah, in the more independent projects that I work on, I tend to be very involved in the kind of second half of post. I tend to see my role as an editor as kind of the guardian of the cut, and I work a lot with temp music, and as much as I can with actual finished music, whether we can license it in time or work towards licensing a certain piece, or with the composers to try and get as much of their work into the cut as possible, because when we lock picture, I want to try and get the film to as close of a finished product or sense or something that feels right and has all the cues and all the beats and everything as possible. And as such, I tend to ask to go into the mix. Color, it depends on the process and the project. I tend to kind of step out of that because it's not my role. The DOP is there to kind of support on that end. But from a sound mix standpoint, I tend to try and walk in to at least one of the sound design sessions and at least one of the days of the mix, because we spend months on end crafting every little beat and crafting every little cue and crafting every little. Yes, they're temporary sound effects, but there's things that are supposed to be there for a reason. And sometimes they get lost in the translation, and sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. On portraits, there was a sound effect of a baby crying that we very intentionally had under a scene. And at a certain point in the mix, we're sitting and we're looking, and I was like, wait a minute, there was a sound effect here. There was a baby. There was a reason for it to be there. We were using specific sounds and frequencies to do other things, and those shifted and adjusted, and they create a different emotional resonance or a different emotional, like as an audience member, and you've been this audience member for months, like the first and only audience member sometimes for months, you want to make sure that the integrity of that is maintained. So for me on projects like that, I tend to be really not necessarily hands-on, but really involved with the sound designer and with the composers as well to kind of help best I can kind of bridge and sometimes help translate, because it's all just these communication gaps and everybody's trying to communicate with everybody to help kind of really nail the tone, the style, and keep the integrity of the cut.
I think that's really, really smart. And it can be very disappointing if you watch the final film, and a moment that you wanted to hit a certain way doesn't, and it can be pretty disappointing. So I think that's really, really, really smart.
And there's projects where that's okay, and that's, you kind of have to, you lock the cut, you have to walk away from it, you understand, and you trust the director to fully just, and you need to, like always, but you trust it to kind of move on to the next phase and get there. But also it's a collaborative process, and you've been part of that for so long, and you talk about all these tiny minute things so much that hopefully you're able to be part of seeing it through to the end. And often I ask to budget that when there's the money and the schedule for it, right? So it's like making sure that I reserve a handful of days for those final kind of days.
I want to work in some technical questions that came from the audience before we kind of move into some more craft-based stuff. But there were some questions about software, and I mean, not all NLEs are built the same, nor are they priced the same. So what are your opinions about the various different types of software? And is it like I can edit on anything, or is there a preference? Is there one that you use for work the most, but you'd prefer to use another one? And I guess also as another, just to throw in there, how does DaVinci Resolve stack up, considering that seems to be the most free and accessible? Let's start with Hayley for this one.
I do think that there is a certain necessity to be able to cross-pollinate, I guess, or use different, work across all different programs. I prefer to use Premiere, but I do like DaVinci Resolve. I understand why it's so popular. It's really powerful, especially for effects and color, and it can be really streamlined in the process. If you cut in DaVinci, it's very easy to get it to all the different stations kind of after that, if that makes sense. but I don't really think it's enjoyable to cut very much on DaVinci Resolve. That's just my opinion. But they do have a lot of interesting tools, like physical tools that you can use to make that better. But personally, I prefer to use Premiere, but I think it is really important to be able to use all of the different tools available.
Ashley, to you as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to know how to use all the software, and for most part, if you know one, you're going to know the others because they're all very similar in that sense. The one exception to that rule I'm going to say is going to be Avid,
Yeah.
which there's a much steeper learning curve to Avid than there is for the other software. You can't just like be sloppy about how you work in Avid. It doesn't work. Whereas like Premiere and Final Cut will let you just like, okay, let's just grab this, let's drop this in the bin, let's start shoving some stuff around, let's play with it like it's Play-Doh. And Avid a little less so. You need to be a little bit more structured and traditional about how you edit in Avid. But if you want to do things like work in TV, you better know Avid because the TV world is still primarily mostly Avid based. And there's a lot of places I know that if you don't have Avid experience, they will not hire you to work there. It becomes a prerequisite. Whereas I've never seen a place that's like, well, unless you can show me that you've done so many projects on Premiere, then I don't know if we can hire you as an editor. That doesn't happen. I've never had anyone insist that I have to work in Final Cut Pro, which is great because my studio is all entirely PC based at this point. I kind of like jumped off the Mac train about like 6 years ago. And I have actually converted my studio over to being primarily a DaVinci Resolve studio at this point. I made that leap last year and mostly based off of, well, I have this perpetual license for Resolve, and I feel like the software has gotten to a point where it does everything I need to do. And I talked about being able to do like cradle to grave posts before. When I do that, I do it in Resolve because I can do the color grading, the mixing, and delivery all within that one software application. And Premiere, I find, has just gotten more and more sluggish as the years go on, and they keep adding features that are intended for people that make YouTube videos rather than professional editors. I still think Premiere is a great piece of software, and I do like it, but it was very nice being able to say bye to that, $800 expense every year for the Adobe subscription. I hate subscriptions. So that's kind of where I'm at, but I could very easily just hop right into working with Premiere again very easily. And even though I never use Final Cut, I feel confident that if I got into that, I could use that. It just comes with experience with working with this software.
Elad, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think different projects have different needs. Understanding and knowing Avid is a must if you want to work as an editor in the industry. I think it's just it's the standard, so you have to understand it. And yeah, you have to ask yourself: are you doing a larger project, a smaller project? What's the amount of footage? Every piece of software has its own restrictions and its own kind of pitfalls, and they're all evolving. So I don't know if there's a single answer to that. With regards to Resolve, yeah, I haven't used it to cut a project, maybe like one or two smaller things in a while, so it might be worthwhile kind of jumping back in and giving it a shot. But it's evolved quite a bit over the last few years, and I think it's just a sign of things to come. And the best tool to use is the one that you have access to. So if people are just cutting their first short or cutting anything and they can get a free access to Resolve, then that's what you should make a movie on.
I mean, ultimately, the editing process is doing a lot of the same things that every piece of software is capable of. It's bringing in your footage, it's syncing in, it's building a scene, it's doing J cuts and L cuts, and it's like there's nothing really all that fancy about what we do that for the most part, is much larger than anything that we were doing when we were working with physical film and splicing it together. It's all the same sort of techniques. It's just like what software is going to let you, as Robert Rodriguez says, move at the speed of thought. Mm-hmm. It's like the more you can cut down on that amount of time between what you see in your head versus what you can make happen with your hands on the keyboard and mouse in the software, is the best.
I still definitely have like older people in my life who refer to any editing terminal as the Avid. And I just think that that's never going to go away, especially the more you guys speak to like Avid being the professional standard across those worlds.
Not the Edit Droid?
Well, it hasn't been Edit Droid since it's been Avid, right? Like that's, I don't think Avid ever had tape decks. I think once they made the jump from tape decks to physical to digital media, it was all Avid from that point on. Yes.
Oh, I was going to say, this past year when I worked on some 48-hour film festivals, working in DaVinci was really, really great because we could all be multiple, like a few of us could be working on the cut at the same time that somebody's doing the color. So all of like these different components, it was really easy to collaborate with different people. And so if you're going to do a 48-hour or a time limit film festival, I think DaVinci is a really, really good tool for that.
I mean, not having to wrestle with crossing pieces of software is a huge benefit to Resolve on its own.
And the export time is crazy fast.
It works really nicely with raw footage in general. Like the way that it generates its own type of proxies is just really, really comfortable.
Well, and it's changed my process a little bit, like especially when I'm wearing multiple hats in post-production. Whereas traditional editing is like, okay, you do the edit, you get that locked, and then you move on to mix and you move on to color, and then you deliver. But when I know I'm doing all of that, I will get into a mindset where like, oh, I'm freed up to just like go here and do some color tweaking on this master shot before it's, in the cut, or I can easily add some VFX stuff that's going to go in here that I know needs to be there, and it can be cleaned up a bit later. Or I can start doing sound design on the scene that is very heavily sound dependent and get a lot of that like bulk work, the fine work that you need basically a DAW to work in, because you have like, all these tracks that are laid out for doing audio mixing to be able to do that sort of fine work in, and then go back to the edit, which I'm still working on. And it's one application. It's the same timeline I'm looking at, just in different tabs with different layouts. And it gives you that freedom to sort of hop around different disciplines and not just like be locked into the one must be finished before the other must start kind of mentality.
And not worrying about reconforming as you go from software to software, process to process.
The other thing is like tools like Premiere are now developing a lot of collaboration tools and stuff like that. So if you're doing smaller projects, Adobe Teams allows multiple editors to work off the same project, same footage, or Adobe Productions is like an entire workflow that I've used for 2 features now, and we're about to use in another documentary. And it really allows multiple people to be working in ways that you couldn't even do in Avid. And same with Avid, like it allows you to access and multiple people working on things. So it really kind of depends on what you're doing.
It's one of the big reasons why Avid has become like the de facto standard, especially in TV, because up until now, potentially, it's like been the best option for working in a multi-team environment. When you have multiple people working on multiple episodes, it's like that is absolutely vital, and was not really all that viable for Premiere up until fairly recently.
I know that Resolve now has really good native support for Frame.io.
It does,
earlier. So that was a huge selling point for me as well. And the perpetual license, you're 100% right. I mean, the only difference between the free license and the perpetual license essentially is some finishing features.
I've owned the license for Resolve from like 5 versions ago, and it just continually works. Like every
Yeah.
pro version going forward, I've got the pro unlocked just automatically.
I mean, bless
Beautiful.
their hearts for just constantly buying companies, right? Like that's.
Yeah.
I want to speak a little bit about the craft as well, because we discussed earlier the idea of like typecasting in a little bit, and I want to I think it was Ashley who mentioned the idea of like, well, have you done this type of genre before? So how do you avoid getting typecast? How do you break out of that mold, or how do you convince, or just what do you do to make sure that you're not being typecast in those roles? Let's start with Elad for this.
Yeah. You do the work. I don't think there's a way around it. There's no like secret sauce to showing up at a meeting and being like, oh yeah, I can totally do that. It's you got to prove, and you got that you can, and you have to work through it, right? And it needs to be a conscious decision. Like if you want to show that you can work in documentary, you have to go do documentary projects. If you want to work in music videos or short form or anything like that, you have to work in those mediums, and sometimes you have to pay the price. Like you're not going to get $5 million, $6 million feature right off the bat, but you got to work your way up there, and you got to do some smaller projects first and prove that you can, and learn the skills that you need to learn along the way.
Hayley, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially if there's a genre you kind of are interested in, looking for opportunities, like maybe smaller creatives, maybe a small creative is working on a comedy, and you want to bring that into your spectrum of things. You just have to be able to do it and show that you can do it. And yeah, completely agree with that. You have to work. And but Ashley said also that storytelling is storytelling. Yep. And I think that's true as well. So being able to have concrete examples is really important, I think, in trying to get a particular job and break out of one genre.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to approach it, and I think both are valid and can even do both simultaneously. In that, if there's something that you want to do, like whether it's a specific subgenre of narrative film or whether it's like a different type of film, like documentary or commercial, or the difference between doing short films and features, that sort of thing, is you basically have to make that decision and then go, okay, this is my goal, is to do that. Even it's like, oh, I just spent a year where for whatever reason I had like 5 comedies that came to me, and I don't want to be the comedy person. I love doing comedies, but at the same time, I don't want people to like just think of me as the comedy person. And it's like being aware of that, going, okay, I need to go find a horror movie and fast, that sort of thing. Like, if the more diversified you sort of keep your resume, the less able people are to think of you as just like the person that does that one thing. And the danger can be, once people get it in their heads that's like, you go to Ashley because she does this, then it can be really hard to change that mental image that they have in their heads. Because I spent like 5 years working as an assistant editor, I still have people who will call me up who, I haven't seen in forever, be like, hey, I have this assistant editing gig that's opened up. Are you available? And I'm like, I've been a series editor for like years now. No, I'm not assisting. It's like, and it becomes about trying to reframe people's image of you in their heads. It's like, otherwise you will sort of be like frozen in amber to them in their mental image, because people are dealing with so many other people, they can't keep track of everyone. It's like, it makes sense. So you just have to make sure that you're doing the work to craft the type of image of, this is who I am as an editor, so that people know that. The other side of it, though, is that there's incredible power in specializing. If you decide, hey, I've done this specifically with trailers and tried to push myself as much as possible because I love cutting trailers, and I think I'm quite good at it. And I
Good to
cut a
know.
lot of trailers, and a lot of independent filmmakers will come to me because they hear I am the trailer person to come to. And there's not a lot of people who, especially in the indie space, make that decision. Like, crafting advertising campaigns for a film is where they want to specialize, because everyone wants to do like the main body editing. And if you can find a niche that someone else hasn't really claimed, or you can try to claim it in a very specific way, then you'll have jobs roll into you that a lot easier than you might otherwise have to fight for. And you get to be seen as a specialist, someone who has mastered this very specific niche field, and they will come to you for that. And if that is what you've made the choice, you want to be able to do that, then that can be incredibly powerful if people think of you in that way.
Well, there's always money in marketing. When the
Well,
budget's on, there's always money in marketing.
But at the same time, in the indie world where there's not a lot of money
There's never money in
with,
marketing.
the place where there's the least amount of money is at the very end of the process. It's like post-production always kind of gets short shrifted because they shot their wad on production. And then by the time you get to, and we need to market this thing to get to film festivals, at this point, they're taking out loans on top of loans to try to pay for stuff.
Right. Yeah, definitely a bad situation when the tax credits are going to pay for post.
Yeah.
I had a conversation a number of years ago with a DP about a similar thing from their perspective. I was talking about how it's really unfortunate that DPs are kind of looked at as like film stock because they build into these styles. And he was in agreement. He's like, I hate it because like all I want to do is play around and experiment and try different things. And if people are only coming to me because I do this thing, that's not great for me. And I think I respect that. For there's any time when you're going to have a touch, I mean, directors, editors, production designers, DPs, right? All of those have the propensity to be typecast based on what they do. I mean, actors, because that's where that comes from, but based on the consistency of the work that you do. And if you excel in that area, people are going to want you for that area, and that might not be in line with how you want to progress through your career.
And I think everyone struggles with this, like in every discipline across the field. I mean, kind of famously, Wes Craven always wanted to do dramas, and because he found success in horror very easily, because very early, because that's where he was able to break into the industry and was good at it. No one ever thought of him as anything other than the horror guy, and he was never in his entire career able to break out of that.
Well, I mean, that's a fair thing. Look at like Coppola versus Lucas, right? Where it's like Lucas just wanted to make indie films and ended up making this blockbuster that then only made blockbusters, and Coppola wanted to make blockbusters and only made indie films.
Yeah.
It's a fair thing to try to break out of. I guess this also leads naturally into another question I wanted to ask, which is, how do you guide your career? I mean, we've kind of discussed this a little bit, but are there any more points that you'd like to bring out that are specifically related to this? Like, is there any input you'd give to people who are also trying to make this decision from that perspective? Let's start with Ashley for this.
I think it's again, I think there's two ways to go about it. I think you have to decide what it is you want, and where you want to direct or redirect your career, what types of projects you want to be working on, what sort of people you want to be working on, what you think is going to get you up to that next level. Have you done a lot of shorts and now you just really need to get a feature under your belt? Then you need to like actively put in the work to chase down that type of project, wherever you can sort of like get those credits and sort of build up that cred. Because anytime you move into like a different kind of sub area, I don't want to say it's like starting over again, but you definitely you're proving yourself all over again. And another part I think is also finding value in taking your hand off the wheel to a certain degree and accepting the career that you have versus the career that you want. Not with totality, of course, but there's it's really easy to get frustrated because you think back, God, 15 years ago when I got into this crazy industry, I wanted to do this, and now I'm over here doing this. And even though I'm like successful at what I'm doing and good at what I'm doing, it's still not what I intended from the beginning, and get frustrated with that. And you're never going to have absolute 100% control over your career if you find success in this industry. It's going to be a certain amount of like, well, this is what was needed, and here's where I fell in, and this is what I found success in, and being happy with the place where you find success. Always striving for more, of course, but understanding it's like there's going to be a lot of elements of your career that you're not going to have control over, and being okay with that. And I think that's fine. And it's one of the reasons why I sort of said at the beginning that for me, it's all about working with people. And I'm much less, I don't want to say uninterested in what the story it is they want to tell, but to me, it's like, again, story is story is story. I'm going to find the best version of the story that they want to tell, as long as I don't find anything like ultimately abhorrent about it. And every story presents its own set of challenges and its own unique chance to tell, a new type of story and go on a new adventure. And you never know what's going to land. Sometimes the smallest, most insignificant projects that have come across my desk, and it's like, oh, well, I'll do this as a favor, but this is going to go out in the world, and a few people are going to see it, and it's just going to like disappear. And then next thing you know, it's playing at huge film festivals all around the world, and people are claiming you for your work on it. It's like, you never know what's going to blow up, and projects that you think are going to be like, oh, this is going to travel, this is going to be great for me, and like no one ever sees it. And it's like, no one knows anything in this crazy business, and once it goes out into the world. So it's like, you do the best you can, and you stick it out into the world, and you just try to keep moving forward and doing better than you did before.
Hayley, how do you guide your career?
In a lot of ways, I think that it just sort of guides itself with the opportunities I'm given, which is kind of like what Ashley was saying, like taking your hand off the wheel and just going with the flow of opportunities and kind of where your career is taking you. But I think that there is an important thing to be said about saying no, which I struggled with in the past, but there is something like it is really important to know when to say no to something, in order to, prioritize other things, or try to find something that more aligns with what your goals are. And I think that the best way to kind of build your career is to make connections with people and meet people, make friends with key creatives. A lot of my work has just been gotten through referrals and through the community. So I think that making yourself known in the community is an important part of trying to grow your career. And as everyone else is growing, you can grow with them, and opportunities can be given out here and there in ways you might not expect.
Elad, how do you guide your career?
I don't know if I have anything to add. I think both Ashley and Hayley said a lot of really great stuff. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, it's really great when the panels are agreeable with each other. I mean, conflict's fun, but like, it's really nice when you brought everybody on and they're like, oh yeah, that's the thing I mean. It's like, good, okay, cool, that's the standard. We're gonna go by that.
Editors are not very conflict driven.
Well, I mean, hey, maybe that would make for more interesting films. I think I'm going to close out on this question, although I think depending on what I see on the clock, I might pop in one more. But how would you suggest to people who are interested in becoming an editor to get started in this career? For this, I'll start with Elad.
Go volunteer on shorts. Go work on the 48 hours, the Crazy Eights, to build your network and get to know the people in the community, because there's a lot of people wanting to make movies, and if you've decided you want to make a career in editing, start being that person. and get into it not necessarily directly through editing. Start assisting and start your way on set. Like you could be a DIT, you could be many other things, but you want to get into that pool of people.
Hayley.
Yeah, I completely agree. Being active in or a part of the community, there's a really great Facebook community for independent filmmakers, and they're always looking for different things. Getting on set is really great, and especially in indie, people are really willing to help you if you ask, or show you what they're doing, or if you have a question and you want to know something. Indie's a great space to learn that, because people want to share what they know, and so if you just get on set and start talking to people and start volunteering and asking questions and trying things, I think that's the best way to start growing your career.
Ashley, same question to you.
Yeah, same thing. It's like if you want to start editing and you don't really have any leads, just there's people sticking their ads out saying, "Hey, I'm making a film. We need this." It's like, accept that you're going to do a whole lot of free work up front. I haven't done this, but I suspect that this might actually be a good strategy, not necessarily for networking, but for just like learning your craft and getting really comfortable with doing stuff quickly with the software. I'm sure there's no shortage of like YouTubers that want their stuff edited down so that they can put their content out there, and that's just a really good opportunity to like get really good with using your platform, so that you can make use of those skills on other people's films, and just work out from there. This industry is reputation based, so the more you work, the as long as you don't start burning bridges, then you'll start to get a reputation, and you can work with people and start getting money. And you never know where jobs are going to come from. My entry to working in paid TV actually came from a contact I made on someone who came out to volunteer on a short I was shooting and directing. So it's like you don't know where these sort of contacts are going to come from, but it's as soon as you meet someone, people are pretty amicable to being able to like recommend you for other stuff. Unless you make like a horrible impression or something like that, or completely sabotage a project. So don't do that. But yeah, just keep working, keep meeting people, grow your network, and, build your reputation to the point where people are actively coming to you.
I will toss out one more fun question just before we do, our outro. Is there a film that stands out to you that has particularly strong editing, or one that the editing is the focus for you? I'm just going to open this up. I don't need to toss it to anybody if you have one.
I always go to Scott Pilgrim. It's one of my favorite films, and you can really see the care put into every aspect of that film, and it was shot with an edit in mind, which I think is really cool. It was shot with post-production in mind, which is, yeah.
I think you could say that about all of Edgar
You
Wright's
could say
films.
that.
That's one of the things that I love about his films, is they are very much kind of editorially driven. The one that I always look to, and I always wish I could do like a project like that. I had a director once ask me that. It's like, what's one thing you want to do in editing that you haven't been able to do? And so I pulled out my copy of The Limey and showed them that, because that movie has like some really kind of, a lot of people describe editing as invisible art, the sort of thing where it's like, if you notice it, then you're not doing your job properly. I don't necessarily agree, because I love editing that you notice, that is there intentionally, and is there to be seen, and it is like the creative intention of the scene. And The Limey is one of those movies where like they would shoot the same conversation with two actors in 5 different locations, and then just like throughout the scene of this conversation, cut between those 5 different locations. It's incredibly jarring, but it's also incredibly hypnotic. And there's something that is like so creative and freeing about doing something like that as an editor, where you can take something that just like, this is normal standard bare narrative, dialogue driven scene, but let's now create it as montage.
Which show?
And
Sorry, what movie?
The Limey by Steven Soderbergh
Oh,
with Terrence Stamp. Incredible movie. It's like it's my go-to sort of like, desert island for editing movies. I love that film.
Ella, do you have anything that stands out for you?
I have to think about that. There's a few TV shows that I've seen
Okay.
recently that have kind of thrown me for a loop, just in terms of like it becomes a quality of filmmaking thing, right? Like if you watch things that have happened, like Euphoria blows my mind in terms of how
For sure.
how they construct the show. Obviously they storyboard a lot of it.
It's definitely
but
like a
also how, like,
filmmaker show. Like I try to tell people that who might be turned off by the subject matter. Like it's really high on the filmmaking.
Incredibly high on the filmmaking, and then in terms of like what they do with pace, but then also like looking at what I'm spacing out on the guy's name, the director's name, how he uses a lot of these similar techniques, and like his feature. Wow, I am completely spacing out. He did a feature right beforehand called American Son Levinson, Assassination Nation.
Okay.
And they do a lot of like similar techniques and working, like deciding when to cut, when not to cut. It's very fascinating to me. But yeah, delving into more specifics, I need to wrap my head around that. I think it's a loaded question.
A little bit. I feel that. Mine is definitely an Orson Welles film. He has this little experimental mockumentary called F for Fake.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that stands out as like, this is the gold standard of editing. Like, I think that everybody who's interested in editing should watch it from the perspective of like, there's so much to try and experiment and explore in that film, and like in piecing a narrative together. That is, documentary is I think a great way to learn to edit in general, because you're constructing a narrative from whole cloth. Like you're creating the narrative. And the same thing happens when you're technically when you're editing dramatic narrative, except now the pieces are there for you, but you still have to make it whole cloth. So it's interesting places to explore. It was an audience question, and I liked it. So I wanted to toss it to you guys.
I will say though that I think one of the best editors working in feature films today is Eddie Hamilton, who did like the last couple Mission Impossible movies and Top Gun Maverick and the Kingsman movies. And I think he does some really good creative editing within those genres. So I'm hoping he gets the Oscar this year.
Well, that would be nice. It's a surprisingly good year for nominations this year.
It's a great year.
I didn't expect it to be like this. I want to thank you guys for joining us. But before we head out from this, I just want to toss it to you guys to tell me, like, where can people find you? What do you have coming down the pipeline next that you're proud of or you want to plug? And I'll start with Ashley for this.
Sure. I don't have a great answer on where to find me right now, because I sort of like, I don't know, doing a little bit of exodus from Twitter, which was the main place to find me, but I'm in a bunch of different places. However, I will throw out my Twitter at Ashley Lynch, because my pinned post is just all the other places to find me. So that's the easiest breadcrumb I can throw out there, because I'm on like every other social media service that has cropped up and tried to take over now that Twitter's like, going down like the Hindenburg.
It's a fair assumption.
Aside from that stuff I've got in the pipeline, I don't know, the next season of Lego Ninjago, I'm not sure when it's coming out. I think about like half the season's done at this point, so it's, I think getting pretty close to the point where people are actually going to be able to see what we're working on, and I'm very excited for that, so keep an eye out for that.
Excellent. Hayley, where can we find you, and what do you have coming down the pipeline?
I am Only really on Instagram. I'm not super active as far as posting, but I am pretty active with my stories and kind of promoting what I'm working on at the moment. And right now we just finished production on a short web series called Rejection, and I'm very excited for that. Probably won't be hearing from it for about another year or so when it starts to make the rounds, but I'm really excited about that, and excited to be working with Andy and Marco on Bucketheads this year.
I love them. They're so great.
They're great. Yeah.
Elad, where can we find you, and what do you have coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, Instagram's probably the best at Elad Tzadok, and my website, which is eladtzadok.com. And coming down the pipeline, we have a feature that premiered at VIF last year and is just kind of in the thick of the round. So I'm in the middle of that, and hopefully people get to see it. It's called Unarchived. It's a documentary. So stay tuned for a few local screenings of that. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank all of you guys for being part of this today. I enjoyed this panel immensely, and the discussions that we had here. So, thank you so much for joining us today. Really.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was
Thank
lots
you.
of fun.
Thanks.
Again, I want to thank our panelists for joining us. I want to thank our festival co-directors and our board for this event, and Creative BC for sponsoring this panel series, as well as all of our other festival sponsors for their continued support. I especially want to thank Andrea Feltrin, who is running the back end of these events right now, who I both figuratively and literally couldn't do this without. I want to remind everybody that there's that all of our panel series for this year, as well as the ones from our last round, are available on our YouTube channel. For this one, they'll all be available immediately following these streams. You're welcome to join us tomorrow for our Planning Your Festival Strategy panel. Following it will be a series of Keep It Short speed meetings, which you can sign up for through Eventbrite, and we hope to see you there. A reminder to please fill out our survey following this event. We really appreciate your feedback, and your answers will help us put together future panel series. Again, a reminder that our submissions end on February 10th for our upcoming festival. So please, if you have some stuff that you want to submit, you have some time to do it still, and please, would love to see your work. And from everybody here at VSFF, thank you for joining us. Bye now.